computer. Hi, Dr. Asher. Thank you so much for agreeing to talk to me about your writing practices for my class, Data Representation and Writing Up Qualitative Research. I am familiar with your work, and I've been a fan of your work for a very long time, and we've crossed paths and conferences and such. But just to begin our conversation, would you share what your practice of writing is? How do you approach writing qualitative research?
Sure. So in turn, then thank you, Dr. Bhattacharya. Maybe use first names, Kakali, for this invitation to dialogue with you and your students through video. And thank you also for your good work and contributions in the field. Every little bit makes the difference, right? So thank you. So hello, class. We don't get to see each other face to face. I want to acknowledge that I am talking with students here too. So in terms of my writing practice, was that the question?
Yes, writing practice.
Yeah, so I am someone whose brain always goes in multiple directions. And so my writing practice it's been generative. I'm grateful for that. It's always gone in multiple directions. And it took me a while when I was a graduate student to recognize how I was making connections across discourses. And I just thought it was kind of what you did. But then you find out that's not necessarily what everyone does. So for me, in writing, I'm not someone who gets up every morning at 4 and writes for 3 hours before she permits herself even like a slice of toast or something like that, a piece of toast. I have always written kind of in spurts.
Yeah.
And one of the things with my writing is it's always been idea-driven. That said, it's not a binary between ideas and practice and ideas and research projects. So for me, the ways in which I've shaped my manuscripts, my research projects, comes out of connections with postcolonialism and postcolonial thought, largely feminist thought, critical perspectives on multiculturalism, right? And when I began grad school, all of this was emerging as a discourse, really. So it goes back like 25, 30 years, right? Did I kind of respond to the question?
Yes, absolutely. In fact, now I'm going to ask a follow-up question because you said so many interesting things. These fields that you are talking about that was emerging, post-colonial stuff, and on other critical things, feminism. I mean, they were emerging and were doing the same things that I was doing, and I'm talking about. I graduated in 2005, so it was still emerging. Methodologically, it was a difficult place to be because a lot of this work came out of, humanities and liberal arts, and we were here in education, and we have to pull this theory and figure out a methodological thing to look at our data with that kind of a lens. So how did you navigate that to figure out what your writing ought to be like? And these are very contradictory, contested spaces too.
Yeah, well, I'm teaching graduate research classes here also at my university. And one of the things all my students hear from me is, which came first, the chicken, egg, or the omelet? I don't know why I've thrown the omelet in there, but why not, right? For good measure. Mm-hmm. So in terms of how to kind of match, fit, or get theory and method to work with each other, in my case, what happened early on, I'll talk about early on and then what I have been doing in recent years. So early on, when I was a grad student, and this sounds bizarre to most grad students, and definitely to undergrads these days, is, this was before the internet era. So anyway, at that time, the whole thing about library searches, everything was so different then, right? Card catalogs is what we used at Teachers College, right? At that time. So I began delving into possible research topics as a grad student. And originally I thought I might do something on bilingualism. Then I realized it wasn't quite the right fit for me after doing a paper. And that's when I found out, it sounds silly to say it today, but that there was barely any literature on Asian American education and none on South Asian American.
Right.
So that's kind of how I arrived at that. And then as I began reading in that area, the discourse of multicultural education began blossoming then, including critical perspectives on multiculturalism, right? So all the range of big names, whether it's Sleeter and Grant, Geneva Gay, whether it is Jim Banks, whether it's Cameron McCarthy, I mean, like the spectrum, right? One can think of. So I was like, oh, wait, this study fits in with the discourse on multiculturalism. And then at the Columbia University bookstore, I stumbled across Location of Culture, and I pick up this book and I'm looking at it and I'm going, oh my God, this is exactly the things I'm thinking about as I'm working with my data. So then I came to postcolonial theory, not knowing that that's exactly what was happening, right? And then later on, by the time I was finishing up the doctorate, I found myself reading postcolonial feminist scholars, right? So, and it sounds linear, but it really is not. It's organic. Mm-hmm. And now these days, what I do is, I'm certainly, before I even came to the US, for my doctorate, I had encountered Paulo Freire's work with in my first job after my master's in India. I will still draw on Paulo Freire, right? I mean, when I want to talk about conscientization or critical pedagogy, whichever way. But now I also, at this stage of my career, as I develop new projects, I've drawn on globalization, because it's like, how can one talk about postcolonialism without talking about globalization today? Mm-hmm. My current work, I am reading the writing of James Baldwin. So I've sort of gone towards the humanities a little bit. And it's because I watched Hanif Qureshi's My Beautiful Laundrette all over again for some reason about a year ago or so, and found out that he was actually inspired by Baldwin and some of his writing. Hanif Qureshi was. Mm-hmm. So these days, as a full professor, I can do some different journeying again. Mm-hmm. And I will still draw on postcolonialism, on feminism, films and literature to do some of this work. Yeah. So did that answer the question a little bit too much?
No, it's interesting because that journey is so nonlinear. We've all had those nonlinear journeys. And I wonder, when our students go through this, it must be so confusing to them to one of the things that they always ask me is, how do I know I'm picking up the right stuff? And I don't know how to always answer that, because I don't know if you're picking up the right stuff until you read it, write it, think about it, share it with other people, see how it, floats. I don't know if it's the right stuff. If it's the right stuff, I don't know how to answer that question really. And from what you are saying, it sounds like, it became right because it had a very high resonance with you.
Exactly. Yeah, you picked up on it exactly. One of the things that my major professor, who, was a solid teacher ed scholar, Karen Zumwalt, very well known, very well respected in that field, then, this is way before postcolonial anything came up, right? She really helped all of us who worked with her to kind of get really grounded. And for some reason, as I'm speaking, what's popping into my mind is, for instance, Lisa Delpit's article in the Harvard Ed Review, about the silence dialogue from the 1990s, where she says that if you don't have certain basic skills, writing process, right? So similarly, in terms of basic skills as a PhD student, what questions am I asking? How are these questions significant to anyone beyond me? Right. Like the significance of the problem, right? So if a particular topic interests me, one is the topic and connecting it to the larger field and how it might contribute to the field, what niche or what lacunae, it might address in the field. That's one thing. Two is actually, and I discuss this with students in my classes too, taking the time, the pains actually to phrase your question in a solid, thoughtful way, which makes the question both concise, clear, and allows for complexity and generativity, right? And then what I was taught as a graduate student too is then, students often, as we hear, students hear different terms. It happens with all of us, postcolonial this and post-structural and phenomenology and this. they all sound very exciting and you want to quickly go to one or the other. Sometimes you may find the right fit. Other times, permit yourself kind of to think about which methods actually will allow me to get data that will let me answer my questions, And then, so it is through that one reaches also then for different bodies of literature, because if you're drawn, say, to phenomenology and you find yourself reading Heidegger or Van Manen or whoever is current, or if you read post-structural and Michel Foucault or something like that, then you're also going to look for research methods that others have drawn on, right? Like I always tell students that there really isn't, from my perspective, in my work, I'm not saying it's not out there. Like I can't say I use a post-colonial methodology. Rather, I use post-colonial theories and discourses and post-colonial feminist theories to allow me to shape my qualitative methodology or my ethnographic methodology, right? Mm-hmm. So did I, again, answer the question a little bit?
Yes, very much so. Very much so. So when you write, do you have a special time or place or special way you enter the writing process? Do you clear the space? Is your table clean? How do you approach the physicality of writing?
I probably should not answer that question because I'll teach the students all sorts of bad habits. So, honestly, some of it is a function of career stage and age. Some of it is, so when I was younger, like a lot of us, I did a lot of my work in coffee shops, even. Right. Like as an assistant professor, you do study hall with other assistant professors, and you're cranking stuff out. Then as you become more senior, which just means more committee work, right? That's one way to read that. So in your career, it's actually harder to find time to write. And somebody may say, oh, that sounds like an excuse, but it really is not, because you are doing a lot of writing, but the writing is like reviews of other people's dossiers and, things like that, right? Reviews of manuscripts and things like that. Mm-hmm. So now I kind of write when I can. I can't say that I'm very good about clearing off spaces. I tell myself that it would help me more. Mm-hmm. For me, the big thing is clearing off my mental space. Mm. So if I have, for me, and different people function differently. Mm-hmm. If I have like a bunch of meetings and tiny to-do things or whatever throughout the day, mm-hmm. I don't try and push myself to it until I've gotten all of that. And I'm an owl. When I was in grad school, I remember a friend saying some of us are owls and others are just bats. I don't think I've ever been a bat. I haven't stayed up always until 4 or something. But I used to, for my dissertation, I wrote between 8 p.m. and 2 a.m.
Interesting.
Some people like get up at 4 or 5 and are writing, after they've done their jog or whatever. Mm-hmm. So I still like to write later in the day. But now I don't typically stay up until 2. Once in a way, I might do that, right? Right. The big thing for me that has shifted in terms of the process of writing, I would say, is when I was younger in my career, I did not know when I had lots of big ideas, because I'm kind of an ideas-driven person, as I said. I began working on something and then find it hard. Like Kakali, before we began this recorded part, we were talking about how a manuscript just burgeons and becomes this much bigger piece. So that time when I was younger in my career, I would then find that what I was trying to make into one paper would become 2 or 3 papers. Mm-hmm. And actually it still happens for me. Yeah, exactly. Which is a good thing in a way. So the difference though is that now I feel like I'm better able to see it sooner, that, oh, this is a much bigger piece. Mm-hmm. So here is how I'm going to move this bit aside and just summarize it and then develop it later, And honestly, what I would say to students out there is, if it's a little bit overwhelming now or a lot bit overwhelming, kind of enjoy it. And yeah, don't roll your eyes at me, you all, but enjoy it, because it means that you're actually onto something, that you're actually onto some really generative work. And then depending on each person's style, one will find ways to then kind of compartmentalize or siphon off, or however you want to think about it, the work, Now I create, because everything, it's different from when I was in grad school. So now I create another blank document sometimes, and I'll just throw extra stuff from my paper onto the blank document. So I know it's like sitting there, and then it lets me just return to the manuscript at hand.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. Do you write out your outline first, or do you just write and see what happens, and as it happens, the paper takes shape?
Yeah, yes, and yes. So, yeah, I mean, here, let's see if I can do this correctly. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, a little advance heads up. I was invited to do the keynote at Bergamo.
Oh, excellent.
In 2018. Yeah, this fall. I don't know if this should be public, but I wasn't told it shouldn't. So right after the conversation, my brain was like buzzing. And as I mentioned earlier, I've been working with some of these thoughts from Baldwin around dualisms and so on. So this is what I scribbled out. It doesn't look like the kind of outline that we tell, a tidy outline. But here, this is an outline. Now I've just let it sit since I scribbled it out. And one day over the summer, or whenever I get to the paper, I will build off it. But, and God knows, who knows what else is going to kind of come into my work and thought, right? Yeah. What maybe I shouldn't have held that up. The students will be like, okay, this is leeway for us, or there's no hope at all.
No, they do their own scribbling and their own note taking, and I have encouraged them to keep a journal with them at all times, so that they know but they don't know what will hit them, but it can be digital, it can be in writing. Some people still like to do with pen to paper. The kinesthetic touch is a very big way for them to stay close to what they're saying and doing. Other people are more digital era people, and they're typing on their phone with all that, or recording on their phone and all that. Small minor correction. My name is Kakali.
I am so sorry. Because it's spelled Kakali.
I know, it's because in the Bengali alphabet, it doesn't have like the signs for O, so it's like it has the ka and the a, and then the ka is just a ka. It doesn't have the O.
Yeah.
So some people spell it with O, and some people spell it with A. The people who spell it with O, the people who spell it with A look down on the people who spell it with O, because that's not how it's spelled in Bengali. And the people who spell it with O say, but that's not how it sounds. So there's schools of thoughts on this. But anyway.
Right. No, Kakoli. Yeah. Thank you for letting me know and correcting me, which
that's
was true, right? You can never do enough research.
So one of the things that I wanted to maybe talk before we wrap up is challenges. So we have challenges in writing at any stage of our career. Can you think of, like, when you were doing the dissertation or as an early career professor, what were some of your challenges in writing? Like, what were the most difficult walls that you felt like you really had to work very hard to get, to negotiate and overcome it?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, one of the biggest things was this thing about writing, finding yourself in paper or taking on a topic that was way bigger than I realized, and sometimes then feeling like at a standstill with it and so on, right? And then what would help is to like peer review or with a writing group or whichever way that, you could break this down, and it's okay to do a smaller piece. Not every piece has to be like a they all have to be very good pieces of writing. I mean, if you care about your scholarship, which of course we all do, but not everything has to be like to send only to the top tier journals is one way to think about it, right? They'll still be excellent peer-reviewed journals, but they don't all have to be like AERA journals, right? For instance, right? Yeah. So that, I think, was one of the biggest hurdles for me. I'm trying to think of what else. Yeah, I just, and learning to compartmentalize, those have been my two big, yeah.
In qualitative research, it's so hard for a lot of us who haven't had prior narrative writing training, and a lot of our students don't have that. I didn't have that. I was in the Dell program of Indian upbringing. You have to be doctor, engineer, lawyer, otherwise you're a loser. So I was in that.
I haven't heard that before. Okay.
Yeah, so I was on that path, so I was in biochem and all of that stuff. So by the time I got to education, I didn't have a narrative writing background. So I find that a lot of my students have trouble with representing the data in their writing because they don't quite know how to get close to it, how to take descriptive writing around it, how to really think deeply and critically about it. I mean, they do, but it takes a very long time for them to come to a place where I'm like, okay, we're ready to go defend now. So how did you navigate that? Did you come from a prior background that had narrative writing, or did you have other tools that helped you navigate that?
That's interesting. Yeah, I'm trying to think about this. So am I right in hearing that you're finding that many students kind of struggle with synthesizing their data into particular chunks of themes or something like that?
Right. Whether they're writing a narrative inquiry piece or an inductive thematic narrative piece, or they're
Right,
writing
got it.
anything, it's just a lot, and they don't always feel confident with their creative writing training because they don't have any, and some of the writing requires you to be so descriptive and do the show not tell, and a lot of them have only had expository writing experience.
Ah, got it. Yeah, so no, I can't say. I mean, yes, as you already acknowledged, having grown up in India and done my first master's there, where it was the first time we were really asked to write papers, not just answer, exam questions. But I was not trained in writing like that. So that happened here in the US with my doctoral studies. But once again, going back to kind of learning some of the quote unquote phrase one shouldn't use, it actually works, like basic skills of actually putting a dissertation together. Always go back. What I tell my students is that it's like a spinal alignment. Imagine a spinal alignment. Always go back to your research question. So once you have the data, if you've given thought to which methods you want to use that you think are going to, and you may get data that you didn't expect to get, but you should ultimately be getting, whether you expected to hear this or that from an interviewee or in the field or whatever, that's not the biggest thing, because unexpected bits of data can be amongst the richest, right? Mm-hmm. But once you have the data through the methods to which you've given careful thought, right? Which methods, because these methods you think are going to let you get these kinds of data, qualitative, narrative, whatever it is. And then one listens to the data for themes. And a lot of students want to use, which makes sense, a lot of folks want to use those citation managers and software for data analysis, and that's all dandy. At the same time, nothing can really replace, and replace shouldn't even be the goal, I think, but the researcher's own focus that this is the topic that interests me. And so how are your data, how are the stories, the narratives, your field notes, what themes are jumping out? It could be something as simple as doing a word search, even, using whatever, what do you call it? Like the Word or whatever those programs we use,
The cloud, the word
processing
cloud?
program. Yeah. One could just simply do a word search, equity or something. Right. If one is trying to understand, let's say, school superintendents' perspectives on equity in public high schools in blah, blah, blah town or something. I don't know, Mm-hmm. So one could just do a search in equity and synonymous terms, and you may come up with themes and sub-themes right there. So kind of listening to the data is, I think, the biggest thing.
Yeah.
Then Yeah, and then really using excerpts from data, but then where in terms of writing around it and organizing it into themes and analyzing, I would go back to the theoretical issues that I have raised in my lit review and theory section, and see how my data are either supporting or building on the theoretical perspectives, or developing them further, or even challenging or critiquing them, or all of the above.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Does that help?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Very, it helps, and it's good to hear it because it's a lot of the things that I say too. So it's very good for them to hear it in different ways from different people. So I thank you for that. Solidify my position. We didn't script this, you know.
Right. Oh, you didn't. See, this becomes triangulation, y'all.
Right. So if I were to recommend maybe 3 pieces from your work, I'm typing it now. What should I recommend people read?
Oh, that's very generous of you. Thank you. Well, one of the research-based pieces that a lot of people have liked is the one that came out in 2005 in Teachers College Record, the At the Interstices piece.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, that lays out a post-colonial feminist framework, it lays out method, it lays out context, right? And then analyses of data, right? So a lot of people have liked that. An earlier piece, methodologically speaking, is I think 2001 in the QSE, International Journal of Qualitative Studies, an ad about, I can't remember the full title, Beyond Cool and Hip, engaging the question of research and writing as academic self hyphen woman of color other. So this is me finishing up with grad school, poised to start my career as an assistant professor, and wondering, and that time, you know, Foucault was big, like in the 90s and so on. And then thinking about what does it mean to do this work without it simply being like lip service to being like hip or doing hip work, actually staying grounded, right? Mm-hmm. So that's kind of speaking to research methods, and obviously it came out in the QSE. And then I guess maybe the piece in the Ed Researcher, which is kind of speaking to the field, right, in terms of multiculturalism and how multiculturalism is here to stay. It's become, you know, available at every corner store now, and yet we struggle with how it gets co-opted in practice, right? Mm-hmm. So those are kind of 3 from major journals.
That's great. That's great. No, I will definitely have it. And what we're going to do is we'll have the recording on the Canvas. Canvas is our learning management system. Mm-hmm. So we'll have the recording on the Canvas page, and then we'll also have your work that they'll read, and then they'll just engage. This is going to be an online class. We have a face-to-face class, but I'm converting into an online, and I have a little bit of time to do that. So I can do it thoughtfully, you know, as opposed to just rushing into it. So I will have that, and I will put your work in there. Canvas won't let me add you because it wants institutional email, but I will definitely do screenshots so you can see that. But I'll also give you the URL for the video, which will have it on YouTube. So if you want to use it for anything where you feel like you're repeating the same things to the students and you're like, go watch this video, then you have that as well.
Well, thank you. That's very generous of you. Thank you. Yeah, and if